the last 6 months in India, we've had one of the largest organizations of farmers protesting in India for over now 6 months against farm laws which were legislated recently during the peak of the pandemic, during lockdowns. And these farm laws essentially are being protested by farmers' organizations because they completely deregulate agriculture markets in India, paving the way for the complete takeover of our food systems by agribusiness and corporations. And of course, the farmers are struggling because it is about finally the sovereignty of our food and who shapes our food, how it is grown, who will produce it. And of course, for us, the evidence that the Biden administration has not at all changed its imperialist economic agenda is that they have completely supported these farm laws. Not once have they spoken out in support of the farmers, because for the Biden administration in the US, essentially these farm laws are a way in which they improve the so-called efficiency of Indian agriculture markets. And of course, they open and pave the way for further private sector investment. And that's what the US is finally interested in, because it is finally about the economic imperial interest of the US, which is anchored essentially by the control of food. And as we can see here, you know, even you go back to what Henry Kissinger had to say about what their interests are. And finally, it is when you control food, you can actually control people. And if we look at the history in India and we look at the relations between India and US, even before we became independent and we finally became independent from the British, at the time when we were reeling under famines, those famines were really triggered by food exports, okay? We were a net exporter of food at the time. You've just heard about the Bretton Woods formations and the IMF and the World Bank. And no sooner had we gained independence in 1947, than we went right back into the economic imperialist control. We became members of GATT. Soon after that, within 10 years, you have the PL 480 agenda of food aid, the so-called peace food aid from the US. And of course, all of that ended up really just depressing production in the country and paved the way and set it up for this food aid, which was tied to then India having to take on the Green Revolution technology package. And of course, the Green Revolution technology package only ended up completely making our farmers and making us dependent on external inputs for our agriculture, which till then, of course, you had farmers saving their own seeds. You had this enormous diversity of production in terms of food grains, etc. At the same time, we still controlled and had some kind of space to control and set our own macroeconomic policies. Very clearly in terms of food and agriculture, it was about having a commitment to what we called a universal public distribution system. Given the enormous amount of poverty and malnourished citizens in our country, the fact that every citizen will have right to food through this kind of universal public distribution system, backed up by a commitment to procure grains from farmers at robust market prices. But then no sooner had we got into that, then you have the Washington Consensus, where, of course, this push then goes in between the change from state setting policy to market setting policy. And then by the 1990s, you have the arms of empire, right? The IMF and the World Bank, who through their diktat then forces India into a commitment and to align over the project of neoliberal economic reforms and restructuring. And one of the primary areas of privatization was in the realm of food and agriculture. So of course, one of the things we did was immediately, we changed from a universal public distribution system, which accesses and gives food to people, to what we called a targeted public distribution system. Then of course, we privatize, we remove all subsidies from support to our farmers. We sign on to WTO. We allow for reduction in import duties, and we're flooded with agriculture produce from the global north, which is competing where our farmers have to compete with absolutely no support or no subsidies. And then, of course, you heard in Camden's presentation, and we just went down that route. So there's deregulation in certain sectors like dairying, which is a very primary source of livelihood for millions of small and marginal farmers. Free trade agreements being signed left, right, and everywhere. 100% foreign direct investment in agro-processing, food business. Then, of course, new philanthropic organizations. If it were the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, who really set the stage for Green Revolution, we have today the Gates Foundation, who has literally shaped agriculture policy in the last 10 years in India and pushed forward the so-called evergreen revolution, which is just more of GMO technology coming in the name of building food security. Finally, in 2020 last year, we completely changed and set ourselves up where we changed our agriculture to now agriculture being driven, our policy being driven by an agriculture export policy and the farm laws and the deregulation, as I just mentioned. So if we had first state and market, setting it up so that agro-business in the first 40 years or the 50 years took the controls of the means of production and took that control away from farmers, whether it was seed, pest, or any other kinds of inputs. Today, in the last 10 years, you have this real convergence between domestic capital and international capital, agro-business in India and America coming together. So you have, for instance, the largest big corporate, it's like this huge, big, massive corporate, the Reliance, who's like in love. There's a marriage with Facebook. And so they want to control the entire new emerging retail, the e-food retail businesses. There's Walmart with Flipkart. There's Amazon with other major big concerns. And through all of this, we have to remember that it's millions of traders, vendors, hawkers, small shop owners, along with small marginal farmers and workers who form the informal sector in this country, who are going to be thrown out of their employment, of their livelihood. And in all of this, before the farm laws, we say that we were partially enslaved because there was still some space of maneuvering, of setting your rates, of setting your market prices, of actually having spaces to discover that price. Today, post-farm laws with a privatized market agenda, it's setting itself up for agro-business and agri-business, whether it is US or whether it is any other US companies from the global north, along with corporations in the domestic sphere, to really just take over the entire value chain from farm to plate, And at this moment, we also see that the discourse, the narrative, whether it's the narrative of women's empowerment, the narrative of sustainable agriculture. In the state where I live, Telangana, which was formerly also part of the United States of Andhra Pradesh, for 30 years now, the World Bank has been investing systematically to, so-called in the name of empowering women, to organize women into women's self-help groups in this structure, as you see on the screen here. But really their interest is only about millions of women and their small savings forming into this, it's collectivized into this capital base, which then becomes the base for finance capital to make more profit and profit making more profit. And these women, of course, it's their labor, their exploited labor, which underpins and really is anchoring this kind of support to commodity agriculture production as we see today. Furthermore, in the last 5 years, the discourse on climate efficient agriculture, agroecology, again has been captured by agribusiness, where these small women's groups are literally being used and viewed as areas which will aggregate and be bulk procurers of all kinds of commodity and then just get vertically integrated into agribusiness. So we're talking here and we're looking here really, if Biden today is talking about women's empowerment, it is really this imperialist agenda has been systematically invested in and built up by the other arms of empire. And in this case, we see here very clearly the role of World Bank. In fact, today, India has the highest levels of inequality and also is one of the countries, I think, in the world who has the highest amount of loans that we've taken from the World Bank. At the end of the day, it is about the control of food, whether it's the IMF and World Bank, whether it's the UN systems, the World Economic Forum, and really playing with all of this and in control of all of this is really, we're talking here once again about economic imperialism of the US. And it really shapes the way India responds. For instance, India withdrew from one of the largest negotiations of the multilateral trade agreement, which is known as the Regional Comprehensive Economic Pact. And one of the reasons we cited for our withdrawing from those agreements was that dairying is something that we feared that Australia and New Zealand would dump their dairy products into India. But looking at the Indo-US trade agreement, where once again the US is extremely interested to export its dairy products into India, its highly subsidized dairy products. The Indian government No agribusiness of dairy agribusiness, which protested vehemently in the RCEP case, has actually raised their voices against any of this kind of pressures from the US. So at the end of the day, what we see happening very clearly is US economic imperialism playing itself out, advancing its interests and its agenda, particularly in the space of food and agriculture. And today, if we are protesting the farm laws, it is also about us protesting economic imperialism and the agenda of economic imperialism of the US. I'm going to end here. Thanks.